Lord Arthur Sterling, known as the Ice Duke, possessed wealth, power, and a heart colder than a London winter. He vowed never to marry, defying his meddling grandmother, Beatrice. However, when she issued a ruthless ultimatum to marry her chosen bride by Christmas or lose his inheritance, Arthur prepared for war. He intended to brutally reject the girl instantly until the parlour doors swung open. The woman standing there was no stranger. She was the one person Arthur had spent 5 years trying to destroy. She was the woman who broke his heart, and terrifyingly, she was standing there smiling. The rain lashed against the windows of Sterling House like a whip, a fitting accompaniment to the mood inside the Duke of Ashbury's private study. Arthur Sterling, the 9th Duke of Ashbury, stood by the fireplace, staring into the dying embers. He was 32, broad-shouldered, with eyes the colour of tempered steel, and a reputation that kept half of London's debutantes terrified and the other half intrigued. They whispered that he had no heart, that it had been buried 5 years ago, along with his younger brother, in a tragic riding accident. "You are pacing, Arthur. It creates a draught." A sharp voice cut through the silence. Arthur turned. Sitting in his high-backed leather chair, his chair, was the Dowager Duchess Beatrice. At 78, she was small, bird-like, and possessed a spine made of titanium. She was the only person in England Arthur feared. "I am not pacing, grandmother. I am waiting for you to explain why you interrupted my meeting with the Prime Minister to summon me here." Beatrice took a sip of her tea, her wrinkled hands steady. "The Prime Minister is a bore, Arthur, and you are 32. It is time we addressed the matter of the succession." Arthur sighed, leaning his arm against the mantel. "We have discussed this. My cousin Frederick is my heir. If I die, the dukedom goes to him. The line is secure." "Frederick," Beatrice scoffed, the sound sharp as a pistol crack. "Frederick is a gambler and a fool who would turn Ashbury Hall into a brothel within a fortnight. I will not have it. You need a wife. You need a son. And I have told you," Arthur said, his voice dropping an octave. "I will not marry. I have no desire to bring a woman into this house, to subject her to the misery that seems to cling to our name. Drama suits you, but it bores me," Beatrice said, setting her cup down. She reached into her reticule and pulled out a folded parchment. "I have taken the liberty of solving the problem for you. I have selected your bride." Arthur froze. A cold fury began to rise in his chest. "You did what?" "I have arranged a match. The contract is drawn. The lady has agreed. The wedding is set for Christmas Eve." "Christmas Eve? That is 3 weeks away." Arthur laughed, a harsh, mirthless sound. "You have lost your senses. I am the Duke of Ashbury. I do not get arranged like cattle. I refuse." Beatrice didn't blink. "Read the codicil to your grandfather's will, Arthur. The one I had the lawyers unseal this morning." Arthur snatched the paper she held out. His eyes scanned the dense legal text. Clause 4, Section B, regarding the control of the unencumbered assets. He looked up, his face pale. This says you control the liquidity of the estate until I am married." "Precisely," she smiled, a thin, dangerous expression. "You have the title, Arthur, and the land. But I control the money, the investments, the bank accounts, the maintenance funds for Ashbury Hall, even the allowance for your precious stables. If you do not marry the woman I have chosen by Christmas Eve, I will cut the purse strings. You will be a duke in name, living in a crumbling house, unable to pay your servants." "This is blackmail," Arthur snarled, crumpling the paper. "This is duty," Beatrice corrected. "You have wallowed in your grief for too long. I have chosen a woman of impeccable breeding, strong character, and unique circumstances. She needs this marriage as much as you do." I don't care who she is, Arthur spat. Is she one of the giddy Tinsley sisters? Or perhaps Lady Charlotte, who giggles when she sees a horse? I will not do it. She is waiting in the blue drawing-room, Beatrice said, standing up with the help of her cane. Go and meet her. If you walk out of that room and still refuse, I will sign the order to freeze your accounts tomorrow morning. Arthur gritted his teeth. He had no choice. He would go to the blue drawing-room. He would look this unfortunate girl in the eye. And he would be so terrifyingly cold, so brutally honest about his lack of affection, that she would run screaming into the night. He would make her break the engagement. That way, his grandmother couldn't blame him. Fine, Arthur said, straightening his coat. I will meet your puppet. But don't expect a wedding. Expect a resignation. He turned on his heel and stormed out of the study, his boots echoing loudly on the marble floor of the corridor. He reached the heavy oak doors of the blue drawing-room. He paused, composing his face into a mask of indifferent cruelty. He threw the doors open. The room was lit by the soft glow of the fireplace. A figure stood by the window, looking out at the rain. She was wearing a dress of deep crimson velvet, a stark contrast to the gloom of the storm outside. Madam, Arthur boomed, stepping into the room, let us dispense with the pleasantries. My grandmother has forced this meeting, but I assure you— The woman turned. Arthur's voice died in his throat. The air left his lungs. It wasn't a debutante. It wasn't a stranger. Standing there, with hair the colour of midnight, and eyes that held the wreckage of 1,000 storms, was Lady Clara Hawthorne, the widow, the outcast, the woman society called the Black Widow of Sussex, and the woman Arthur had once loved before she betrayed him to marry a richer man 5 years ago. The silence in the room was heavier than the velvet drapes. A log shifted in the fireplace, sending a shower of sparks up the chimney, but neither of them flinched. Clara Hawthorne looked different than Arthur remembered. 5 years ago, she had been soft, smiling, a girl who smelled of lavender and promised him forever in the hidden gardens of this very estate. Now, at 27, she was sharper. Her cheekbones were more pronounced, her skin paler. There was a guardedness in her posture that hadn't been there before. But her eyes, those violet blue eyes, were exactly the same. Arthur, she said. Her voice was steady, but he saw her fingers tighten around the fan she held. Clara, he breathed, the name tasting like ash in his mouth. Then, the shock was replaced by a surge of old, hot anger. He stepped further into the room, closing the door behind him with a definitive click. So, this is Beatrice's game. She chooses the one woman she knows I despise. Clara lifted her chin. She chose the one woman who wouldn't be afraid of you. Arthur laughed, a cruel sound. Afraid? You should be terrified, Clara. Do you think I have forgotten? Do you think I have forgiven? I expect neither forgiveness nor forgetfulness, Clara replied coolly, moving away from the window. I expect a business arrangement. That is what your grandmother proposed. A business arrangement, Arthur repeated, pacing toward her. Is that what we are calling it? You broke our engagement 5 years ago, via a letter, I might add, to marry Lord Hawthorne because he was a marquis, and I was merely a second son at the time. You chased the title. You chased the money. I did what was necessary, Clara said, her voice dropping to a whisper. And now? Arthur stopped inches from her. He could smell her perfume. Sandalwood now, not lavender. Hawthorne is dead. Rumour says you killed him. Clara didn't flinch, though her eyes flashed with pain. The coroner ruled it a heart attack. The gossips ruled it murder. I see you prefer the gossip columns to the truth, Your Grace. I prefer character, Arthur snapped. Something you lack. Why are you here, Clara? Surely the late Marquis left you with enough gold that you don't need to sell yourself to me. He left me with nothing, Clara said, her voice stark. "Nothing but debts and a reputation so tattered I cannot walk down Bond Street without being hissed at. My father is ill, Arthur. If I do not secure funds by the new year, he will be thrown into debtor's prison, and our family estate will be auctioned off." Arthur stared at her. He wanted to enjoy this. He wanted to revel in the fact that the woman who broke his heart was now destitute and begging. But looking at her, standing proud despite her desperation, he felt a twisting ache in his chest. "So you came to Beatrice," Arthur surmised. "She came to me," Clara corrected. "She offered a deal. I marry you, provide you with the appearance of a stable household, and she clears my father's debts. She also said—" Clara hesitated. "Said what?" "She said you were drowning, and that you needed someone who knew how to swim in dark waters." Arthur turned away, walking to the drink cart to pour a brandy. His hands were shaking slightly. "My grandmother is a romantic fool. I am not drowning. I am thriving." "You are alone in a draughty house, shouting at ghosts," Clara said softly. Arthur downed the brandy in one swallow and slammed the glass down. "I refuse. I will not marry you. I would rather lose the fortune than shackle myself to a woman I cannot trust." "Then do it," Clara challenged. "Walk out. Let your cousin Frederick take the estate. Let your grandmother freeze your assets, and watch me be thrown to the wolves. Is your pride worth that much, Arthur? Is your hatred of me so potent that you would burn your own legacy just to see me suffer?" Arthur glared at her. She was manipulating him, just as she always had. But the thought of Frederick running Ashbury, Frederick, who had once kicked Arthur's favourite hound just for sport, was nauseating. And then there was the other matter. If he turned her away, Clara would be ruined completely. Despite everything, despite the bitterness that had gnawed at him for 5 years, the thought of Clara destitute, perhaps on the streets, made his blood run cold. "If I agree," Arthur said, his voice low and dangerous. "Understand the terms. This will be a marriage in name only. You will manage the household. You will appear on my arm at balls. But do not expect warmth. Do not expect love. And certainly, do not expect me to visit your bedchamber." Clara's face was unreadable, but he thought he saw a flicker of sadness. "I understand. A cold peace is all I ask." "Then it is settled," Arthur said. "We marry on Christmas Eve." He walked to the door, pausing with his hand on the handle. "But know this, Clara. You may have the title of Duchess, but you will never again have my heart." He walked out, leaving her alone in the dim light. Clara waited until his footsteps faded, before she allowed her shoulders to slump. She brought a trembling hand to her lips. "He doesn't know," she whispered to the empty room. "He still doesn't know why I really left." The engagement was announced in the Times the following morning. It sent shockwaves through London society. The Ice Duke and the Black Widow. It was the scandal of the decade. 3 days later, Arthur hosted a dinner party at Ashbury House. It was Beatrice's idea, of course, a way to solidify the union in the eyes of the ton. The dining room was a masterpiece of crystal and silver, but the atmosphere was toxic. Arthur sat at the head of the table, Clara at his right. Around them sat the vultures of high society, Lady Whistledown types, cynical lords, and unfortunately, Arthur's cousin, Frederick. Frederick was a man who looked like he had been soaked in oil. Slick hair, slick smile, slick manners. "So," Frederick drawled, raising his wine glass. "To the happy couple. Though I must admit, cousin, I was surprised. I thought you had better taste than to pick up Hawthorne's leftovers." The table went silent. Arthur's hand clenched around his fork. "Careful, Frederick." "Oh, come now." Frederick laughed, looking around the table for support. "We all know the stories. Poor old Hawthorne died clutching his chest after a cup of Lady Clara's special tea. One has to wonder if Ashbury has a food taster employed. Clara sat perfectly still, her face pale. She didn't look at Arthur. She was used to this. She had endured it for 2 years. The coroner's report was clear, Clara said quietly. It was a heart defect. A defect discovered very conveniently after he changed his will to leave you. Oh, wait, he left you nothing, didn't he? Frederick sneered. Perhaps that's why you're here, digging for gold in a new mine. That is enough, Arthur said. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried a weight that vibrated through the table. I'm just looking out for you, Arthur. Frederick feigned innocence. I'd hate to see you end up like Hawthorne. Or perhaps, like your brother? Another tragic accident. The air left the room. Bringing up Arthur's brother, William, was the one unforgivable sin in Ashbury House. William had died in a riding accident that Arthur blamed himself for. He had saddled the horse that threw him. Arthur stood up. His chair scraped violently against the floor. "Get out," Arthur said. "Arthur, really? Get out." Arthur pointed to the door. "If you are not gone in 10 seconds, I will have the footman throw you through the window." Frederick sneered, standing up and adjusting his cravat. "Touchy. Enjoy your bride, cousin. I'll be waiting in the wings when it all falls apart." Frederick sauntered out. The guests were terrified, staring at their plates. Arthur looked down at Clara. He expected to see her crying. Instead, she was looking at him with an expression he couldn't quite place. Gratitude? Awe? "I apologize for my cousin," Arthur addressed the table stiffly. "Dessert will be served in the parlor." Later that night, Arthur retreated to the library. He was pouring himself a drink when the door creaked open. It was Clara. "You defended me," she said, standing by the doorway. "I defended my family name," Arthur corrected, not looking at her. He insulted the future Duchess of Ashbury. It is an insult to the house. Is that all it was? Clara stepped closer. "Because for a moment, you looked like the Arthur I used to know, the one who couldn't bear to see a bird with a broken wing." "That Arthur is dead," he said harshly. "Don't go looking for him." "I don't believe that," Clara said. "I saw your face when he mentioned William. You still carry that guilt, don't you? You think you don't deserve to be happy." Arthur slammed his glass down. "You know nothing of my guilt. You left. You left when I needed you most. William died 3 months after you ran off with Hawthorne. I buried my brother alone, Clara. Where were you then?" "I wanted to be there," Clara cried, her composure finally cracking. "I wrote to you. I wrote you a dozen letters." "I received no letters," Arthur said coldly. Clara froze. "What?" "I never received a single letter from you after the note breaking our engagement." Clara's eyes went wide. "But I sent them. I sent them to your grandmother. I begged her to pass them to you. I told you I was sorry, I told you." She stopped, biting her lip. "Told me what?" Arthur narrowed his eyes. "It doesn't matter," Clara whispered, backing away. "If you didn't get them, then someone intercepted them." "Or you are lying," Arthur said, "trying to rewrite history." "I am many things, Arthur, but I am not a liar," Clara said firmly. "Ask Beatrice. Ask her about the letters." She turned and fled the room. Arthur stood there, his heart pounding. Beatrice. Could his grandmother have hidden Clara's letters? And if so, why? He moved to leave the library, intending to confront his grandmother immediately, but a shadow in the hallway caught his eye. He paused, peering into the darkness. He saw one of the housemaids, a young girl named Tilly, slipping something into her apron pocket as she hurried away from the library door. She looked terrified. "Tilly!" Arthur called out. The girl jumped and dropped the object. It slid across the floorboards. Arthur walked over and picked it up. It was a small velvet pouch. Inside was a heavy gold ring with a ruby setting. Arthur recognized it instantly. It was Frederick's ring. "What are you doing with this?" Arthur demanded. Tilly burst into tears. "I'm sorry, Your Grace. Lord Frederick, he gave it to me. He told me to plant it in Lady Clara's jewellery box." Arthur went still. "Why?" He said if I did it, he'd pay for my mother's surgery." "He wants to call the constable tomorrow," Tilly sobbed. "He wants to accuse her of theft. He said if she's arrested, the wedding can't happen." Arthur closed his hand around the ring, the metal biting into his palm. Frederick wasn't just being a nuisance. He was actively trying to frame Clara. He was trying to stop the marriage. But why? Frederick was the heir. If Arthur didn't marry, Frederick got everything eventually. Why was he so desperate to stop this specific marriage now? Unless Beatrice's threat to cut the money off was actually a threat to the estate itself? Or perhaps Frederick had debts of his own that couldn't wait for Arthur to die of old age? Arthur looked at the crying maid. "Go to your room, Tilly. Say nothing to anyone. If Frederick asks, tell him it is done." "Yes, Your Grace," she whispered and ran off. Arthur stood in the dark hallway. The game had changed. This wasn't just a marriage of convenience anymore. It was a battlefield. And for the first time in 5 years, Arthur felt a flicker of the protective instinct he thought he had lost. Someone was coming for Clara, and God help them, they would have to go through the Duke of Ashbury first. Arthur did not sleep. The image of the gold ring in the maid's trembling hand burned in his mind, but it was Clara's words that haunted him more. "I wrote you a dozen letters." At first light, Arthur marched to the Dowager's private wing. He didn't knock. He threw open the doors to Beatrice's sitting room, startling the maid who was arranging fresh flowers. "Leave us," Arthur commanded. The maid curtsied and fled. Beatrice sat in her armchair by the window, already dressed in stiff black silk. She didn't look surprised. "You look terrible, Arthur. Grief does not suit you, and neither does anger." "Where are they?" Arthur asked, his voice low and trembling with suppressed rage. Beatrice feigned ignorance, adjusting her shawl. "Where are what?" "The letters." Arthur slammed his hand on the small table beside her, making the china rattle. Clara's letters. The ones she sent 5 years ago. The ones she sent after she married Hawthorne. "Do not lie to me, grandmother. I know you have them." Beatrice stared at him for a long moment. Then, with a heavy sigh, she reached into the hollow compartment of her writing desk. She pulled out a bundle of envelopes tied with a faded blue ribbon. "I did it for you," Beatrice said, her voice unusually soft. "You were broken, Arthur. William had just died. Clara had married that monster. I thought reading her excuses would only twist the knife deeper. I thought if you hated her, you would heal faster." Arthur snatched the bundle from her hand. His fingers brushed the parchment. Clara's handwriting. He felt a physical blow to his chest. He didn't wait. He tore the ribbon and ripped open the top letter. It was dated 2 days after her wedding to Hawthorne. "My dearest Arthur, please you must understand. I did not marry him for gold. I married him for William." Arthur froze. "William?" He read on, his eyes scanning the frantic, tear-stained scrawl. "Hawthorne came to me the night of the masquerade. He had William's ledger. Your brother. Oh, Arthur, William had gambling debts, huge ones. But worse, he had forged your father's signature to cover them. Hawthorne had the proof. He was going to take it to the magistrate. William would have been arrested, the Ashbury name ruined, your inheritance seized. Hawthorne gave me a choice. Marry him, and he burns the evidence. Refuse, and he destroys the Sterlings. I could not let him destroy you, Arthur. I could not let you lose your brother to prison. So I said yes. I am sorry. I love you. I will always love you. Arthur fell to his knees. The letter slipped from his fingers. It wasn't betrayal, it was a sacrifice. Clara had thrown herself into the jaws of a beast to save Arthur's family. She had endured 5 years of marriage to a cruel, manipulative man, a man who likely abused her, just to protect the reputation of the brother Arthur was already mourning. She saved us, Arthur whispered, his voice cracking. She saved William's name. And I treated her like a leper. He stood up, stumbling slightly. Arthur? Beatrice called out, looking genuinely alarmed. Where are you going? To beg, Arthur said. I'm going to beg for her forgiveness. Arthur found Clara in the conservatory. It was a glass-walled room, filled with winter jasmine and ferns, humid and warm against the snow falling outside. She was pruning a rose bush, her movements mechanical. Clara. She turned, startled. She wore a simple grey morning dress, her hair tied back loosely. When she saw his face, pale, ravaged, eyes red-rimmed, she dropped her shears. Arthur? What's wrong? Is it Frederick? Arthur crossed the distance between them in 3 long strides. He didn't speak. He couldn't. He simply reached out and pulled her into his arms, burying his face in the crook of her neck. Clara stiffened, her hands hovering uncertainly in the air. Arthur? I read them, he choked out against her skin. I read the letters. Clara let out a small, sharp gasp. Her body began to tremble. Then you know. I know. Arthur pulled back just enough to look into her eyes. He cupped her face with his hands, his thumbs tracing her cheekbones. I know you are the bravest woman I have ever met. I know you sacrificed your life for my foolish brother. I know I have been a blind, arrogant fool for 5 years. Clara's eyes filled with tears. I didn't want you to know the truth about William. I wanted you to remember him as he was, not as a criminal. To hell with William, Arthur swore softly. He is not the one who matters. You matter. Clara, can you ever forgive me? For the things I said? For the way I looked at you? There is nothing to forgive, Clara whispered, a tear escaping and tracking down her cheek. You were hurt. I broke your heart. And you saved my life, Arthur said. He leaned his forehead against hers. The engagement, the contract. It is no longer a business arrangement for me. I cannot go back to being cold, Clara. I cannot pretend I don't love you. I never stopped. I just buried it under ice. Clara let out a sob, half laugh, half cry. The ice duke melts. Only for you, Arthur vowed. He leaned in and kissed her. It wasn't the polite peck of a fiancé, nor the hungry kiss of a youth. It was a kiss of desperation, of apology, of 5 years of lost time reclaiming itself. For a moment, in the warmth of the conservatory, the world was perfect. But outside the glass walls, in the shadow of a gargoyle, Frederick was watching. He saw the embrace. He saw the reconciliation. And he scowled. So, he muttered to himself, turning up his collar against the wind. Love has returned to Ashbury. How inconvenient. I suppose I shall have to kill them both. The days leading up to Christmas Eve were a blur of frenetic activity. The wedding was 3 days away. The atmosphere in Ashbury House had transformed. Where there was once tension, there was now a palpable warmth. The servants whispered about how the Duke was actually smiling. But Arthur was vigilant. He had doubled the guard around the estate. He had Tilly, the maid, moved to a secure room and instructed to report anything suspicious directly to him. Frederick, oddly, had gone quiet. He remained at the estate, playing the role of the contrite cousin, claiming he wanted to make amends before the wedding. Arthur didn't trust him for a second, but he couldn't evict him without causing a scene that might upset the fragile peace with the rest of the family who were arriving for the ceremony. 2 days before the wedding, a heavy snowstorm blanketed the estate. The world turned white and silent. "Let's go skating," Clara suggested at breakfast. Her cheeks were pink, her eyes bright. She looked years younger, the shadows finally lifting from her face. Arthur looked up from his newspaper. "Skating? On the lake?" "It's freezing, Clara." "Exactly," she grinned. "The ice will be thick. Come on, Arthur. When was the last time you did something just for fun?" Arthur hesitated, then smiled. "Very well. But if I fall, you are forbidden from laughing." They walked down to the lake, a vast expanse of frozen water bordered by ancient pine trees. The snow had stopped, and the sun was glittering off the ice. It was idyllic. They strapped on their skates. For an hour, they were just Arthur and Clara again. They glided hand in hand, their breath misting in the air. Arthur spun her around, her laughter ringing out like bells in the crisp air. "I am happy," Clara said, stopping in the center of the lake, her chest heaving slightly. "I didn't think I would ever say that again." "You deserve to be happy," Arthur said, tightening his grip on her gloved hand. Suddenly, a sharp crack echoed through the valley. It wasn't the ice, it was the sound of a rifle. A bullet whizzed past Arthur's ear, missing him by an inch, and slammed into the ice at their feet. "Run!" Arthur roared. He grabbed Clara and shoved her toward the tree line. Another shot rang out. This one grazed Arthur's shoulder, tearing through his coat. He gritted his teeth against the sting, but didn't stop. "Arthur, you're hit!" Clara screamed. "Keep moving." They scrambled off the ice, slipping and sliding, until they reached the cover of the dense pines. Arthur pushed Clara behind a large oak tree and pressed his back against it, breathing hard. He touched his shoulder. His glove came away red. "It's just a graze," he assured her, though the pain was searing. He peered around the bark. On the ridge overlooking the lake, a figure in a grey hunting cloak was lowering a rifle. The figure turned and disappeared into the woods. "Frederick," Arthur snarled. "That wasn't a warning. He tried to take my head off." "We need to get back to the house," Clara said, her voice trembling but her hand steady as she pressed a handkerchief to his wound. "We need to call the constable." "No," Arthur said, his eyes darkening. "The house isn't safe. If he missed here, he'll try there. He's desperate. He knows once we marry, his claim to the fortune is gone forever." "Where can we go?" Arthur looked deeper into the woods. "The old gamekeeper's cottage. It's abandoned, about a mile north. He won't look for us there. We wait until dark, then I circle back and take him down." "We circle back," Clara corrected, her jaw set. "I am not leaving you." Arthur looked at her. The fear was there, but the steel was back in her spine. The Iron Duchess indeed. "Together then," Arthur agreed. They trudged through the deep snow, the cold biting at their skin. By the time they reached the cottage, the sun was setting. The cottage was dusty and cold, but it had a fireplace. Arthur managed to light a small fire using old kindling, trying to keep the smoke minimal. They huddled together for warmth. Arthur's shoulder was throbbing, but the bleeding had stopped. "Why now?" Clara asked, watching. "The flames." "Why is he so desperate?" "Because of the debt," Arthur realized, staring into the fire. "I had my solicitor look into Frederick's finances yesterday. He owes money to the syndicate in London. Dangerous men. If he doesn't pay them by the new year, he's a dead man. He needs my inheritance to save his own skin. So he kills you, inherits the title, and pays the debt," Clara finished. "And you are the obstacle," Arthur said. "As long as I am alive, or if I have a wife who could be carrying an heir, he gets nothing." Suddenly, the door to the cottage kicked open. Arthur sprang up, putting himself between Clara and the door. Standing in the doorway was not Frederick. It was 3 men. Rough-looking men with scars and heavy coats. They held cudgels and knives, and behind them, Stepping into the firelight with a pistol in his hand was Frederick. "Found you," Frederick smiled, though he looked sweaty and manic. "You really shouldn't leave tracks in fresh snow, cousin. It's Scouting 101. "Frederick, this is madness," Arthur said, his voice calm. "These men, are they the Syndicate? You're bringing thugs onto Ashbury land?" "They're here to collect," Frederick said, his eyes twitching. "And since I don't have the money yet, I promised them a bonus if they helped me speed up the inheritance process." One of the thugs stepped forward, tapping a club against his palm. "Which one do we do first, boss?" Frederick pointed the gun at Clara. "The woman first. I want Arthur to watch. I want him to know how it feels to lose everything." Arthur's hand drifted to the fire poker, resting against the hearth. He had one weapon. There were 4 of them. The odds were impossible. But then Clara stood up. "Wait!" she shouted. Her voice was commanding, echoing off the stone walls. The thugs paused. Even Frederick blinked. "You want money?" Clara said, stepping out from behind Arthur. "I know where the Ashbury diamonds are hidden." "Clara, what are you doing?" Arthur hissed. "Shut up, Arthur," she snapped, playing the part perfectly. She looked at Frederick. "The old family vault. The one Beatrice keeps the key to. I know where the spare key is. Millions of pounds in jewels. Arthur doesn't even know about them." Frederick's greed flared in his eyes. "The diamonds. The ones lost in the war?" "They weren't lost," Clara lied smoothly. "Beatrice hid them. I can take you to them, but you have to let Arthur go." "Clara, no!" Arthur lunged, but the thug with the club slammed it into Arthur's stomach. Arthur doubled over, gasping for air. "Fine," Frederick grinned. "Show us the diamonds. If you're lying, I'll shoot you both." He gestured to his men. "Tie the Duke up. Leave him here. We'll take the lady to the house." As the men moved to grab Arthur, Clara caught Arthur's eye. She gave a microscopic nod, glancing at the heavy iron poker he had dropped. She wasn't surrendering. She was separating the group. She was taking Frederick and 2 men away, leaving Arthur with only 1 guard. She was giving him a chance to fight. "Let's go," Clara said, walking toward the door with her head held high. Frederick followed her out, leaving 1 large brute to guard the wheezing Duke. Arthur waited until the door closed. He waited until the footsteps faded. The guard laughed, turning his back to grab a bottle of wine from the shelf. "Looks like your missus sold you out, Gov." Arthur straightened up. The pain in his stomach was agonizing, but his rage was a powerful anesthetic. "She didn't sell me out," Arthur whispered, picking up the iron poker. "She just unleashed the wolf." He swung. Arthur did not stop to check if the guard was breathing. He grabbed the man's coat and the knife from his belt, then burst out of the cottage into the snow. The wind howled, cutting through his thin shirt, but the fire in his veins kept him warm. He ran. He ran until his lungs burned, forcing his injured body through the drifts toward the stables. Inside the main house, Clara was playing a dangerous game. She led Frederick and his 2 hired thugs through the dim corridors of the East Wing. This section of the house was older, drafty, and rarely used. "Keep walking," Frederick growled, pressing the pistol into the small of her back. "If you are leading us in circles, Clara, I will shoot you in the kneecap first." "The vault is in the old chapel undercroft," Clara said, her voice steady despite the terror gripping her heart. "Beatrice had it reinforced during the war. It's where the family hid the silver." She wasn't leading them to a vault. There were no diamonds. The Ashbury fortune was in land and stocks, not piles of jewels. She was leading them to the only place in the house with a door thick enough to hold sound and a lock that could only be opened from the outside. They reached the heavy iron door of the crypt. "Here," Clara pointed. "The key is under the stone archway." Frederick shoved her aside and began feeling around the dusty stonework. "Help me look," he barked at his men. While their backs were turned, Clara looked down the long, dark hallway. She needed a weapon. A candlestick, a vase, anything. Suddenly, a shadow detached itself from the darkness at the end of the hall. Arthur. He was wet, bloody, and looked like a demon rising from hell. He held a cavalry sabre he had ripped from the wall display in the armory. Clara gasped. Frederick spun around. "You!" Frederick screamed, raising his pistol. But he was too slow. Arthur didn't stop to duel. He threw a heavy, brass bust of Julius Caesar he'd grabbed from a plinth. It smashed into Frederick's hand, shattering bone. The pistol clattered to the floor. "Kill him!" Frederick shrieked, clutching his broken hand. The two thugs drew their knives and charged. Arthur met them with the cold precision of a man who had been trained for war. He parried the first thrust, the steel ringing out in the stone corridor, and kicked the second man hard in the chest, sending him sprawling. Clara didn't stand idle. She grabbed the heavy iron key Frederick had been searching for, which was actually sitting in the lock of the door, and swung it with both hands, cracking the first thug over the head, just as he lunged for Arthur's exposed side. The man crumpled. Arthur disarmed the second thug, holding the sabre to his throat. "Run!" Arthur snarled. "Run before I forget I am a gentleman." The thug scrambled away, leaving his unconscious partner behind. That left Frederick. The cousin was backing away, his face white with pain and fear. "Arthur, wait! It was just a misunderstanding. The debts! They were going to kill me! I had no choice!" Arthur stepped over the unconscious thug, the sabre tip lowering to point at Frederick's heart. "You always had a choice, Frederick," Arthur said, his voice deadly calm. "You chose greed. You chose to frame a woman. You chose to try and murder your own blood." I can fix this," Frederick stammered, hitting the wall. "I'll leave England. You'll never see me again." "You are right about that," Arthur said. But before Arthur could strike, or spare him, a cane cracked sharply against the back of Frederick's knees. Frederick howled and collapsed to the floor. Standing behind him, looking immaculate in her black silk, despite the chaos, was Dowager Duchess Beatrice. Behind her stood the estate gamekeeper and 3 footmen, all armed with shotguns. "I believe," Beatrice said, adjusting her lace cuffs, "that the police are already on their way, Frederick. I called them the moment I saw you drag Clara into the house. Did you really think I wouldn't notice a commotion in my own home?" Arthur dropped the sword and looked at Clara. She was trembling now that the adrenaline was fading. "Clara," he breathed. He pulled her into a crushing embrace, not caring about the blood or the audience. She buried her face in his chest, sobbing. "You came back," she wept. "I will always come back," Arthur vowed. Beatrice looked down at the whimpering Frederick, then at the embracing couple. For the first time in years, a genuine smile touched her lips. "Well," she said to the gamekeeper, "take this trash to the cellar until the constable arrives. We have a wedding to prepare for." Christmas Eve descended upon Ashbury Hall, not with the gloom that had characterized the estate for the past half-decade, but with a brilliance that rivaled the stars, burning in the frozen sky above. The transformation was nothing short of miraculous. For days, an army of servants, under the terrifyingly precise direction of Dowager Duchess Beatrice, had scrubbed away the shadows of grief. The great hall, a cavernous space that had felt like a mausoleum since William's death, was now alive. Garlands of fresh holly, ivy, and winter jasmine draped every banister and stone pillar, filling the air with the sharp, clean scent of pine and earth. Thousands of beeswax candles flickered in the crystal chandeliers above, casting a warm, golden glow that danced against the ancient tapestries. In the massive stone hearth, a fire roared with such intensity that it banished the winter chill entirely, crackling and spitting as if to announce that life had finally returned to the Stirling line. Outside, the snow continued to fall in soft, silent sheets, covering the bloody tracks by the lake, and burying the memory of Frederick's treachery under a pristine blanket of white. But inside, the atmosphere was electric with anticipation. The ton had arrived in force. Carriages lined the long driveway, and the pews of the private chapel, and the overflow seating in the great hall were packed with the elite of London society. They had not come to celebrate love. They had come to witness a spectacle. They came to see the Ice Duke bind himself to the Black Widow in what they assumed was a cold, mercantile transaction. Behind their fans of silk and lace, they whispered. They murmured about the rumours of police at the estate earlier that day, about the Duke's injured arm, and about the sheer audacity of Clara Hawthorne showing her face in polite society again. "She's desperate," a viscountess whispered to her neighbour, "and he is heartless. It will be a miserable match. I give it 6 months." Arthur stood at the altar, waiting. He ignored them all. He wore a coat of midnight blue velvet, tailored to accommodate the sling that held his injured arm close to his chest. His face, usually a mask of impenetrable stone, was pale, and a fine sheen of sweat dotted his brow. Not from the pain of his wound, but from a nervousness he hadn't felt since he was a boy. He wasn't thinking about the murmuring crowd or the scandal. He was thinking about the woman behind the heavy oak doors. The organ music swelled, a triumphant, resonant chord that silenced the whispers instantly. The doors groaned open. The collective intake of breath from the congregation sucked the air from the room. Clara did not look like a woman defeated. She did not look like a widow seeking salvation. She looked like a queen claiming her throne. She had eschewed the traditional virgin white, which the gossips would have mocked. Instead, she wore a gown of shimmering silver and pale ice-blue silk, embroidered with delicate patterns of winter roses that seemed to climb up the bodice. It caught the candlelight, making her appear as if she were woven from moonlight and frost. Her dark hair was swept up, exposing the long curve of her neck, and her eyes, those violet-blue storms, were fixed straight ahead. She saw no one but him. As she walked down the aisle, the cynicism of the crowd began to crack. They looked for fear in her eyes, and found only courage. They looked for shame, and found only dignity. When she reached the altar, Arthur stepped forward. He reached out with his good hand, his fingers trembling slightly until they closed around hers. Her skin was warm, grounding him. "You look—" Arthur started, his voice rough with an emotion he could no longer suppress. He searched for a word that could encompass the vision before him, and failed. "Like a duchess?" Clara teased softly, a small private smile touching her lips that was meant only for him. "Like my life," he whispered back, the raw honesty of it making her breath hitch. The vicar, an elderly man who had baptized Arthur, cleared his throat and began the liturgy. The ancient words washed over them, but the tension in the room remained. The guests were still waiting for the other shoe to drop, for the coldness to return. When the time came for the exchange of rings, Arthur turned. He did not face the vicar. He turned his back to the altar and faced the congregation. The silence that fell was absolute. A pin dropping would have sounded like a cannon blast. Arthur looked out at the sea of faces, the people who had scorned Clara, who had isolated her, who had believed the worst of her for 5 years. His eyes were steel, but they were no longer cold. They were burning with a fierce, protective fire. "Before we proceed," Arthur's voice boomed, projecting to the very back of the hall without a tremor, "I wish to make something clear to every person in this room." He paused, letting the weight of his stare settle on the most vicious gossips in the front rows. "For years, society has judged this woman," Arthur said, gesturing to Clara, who stood tall beside him. "You called her names. You shunned her. You whispered that she married the late Marquis for his title and his gold. You wrote her off as a villainess." He took a breath, his voice dropping an octave, becoming dangerous. "I stand here today to tell you that you were wrong. Lady Clara didn't marry for greed. She sacrificed her own happiness, her own freedom, and her own heart to save the Ashbury honour. She endured a living hell to protect my family from ruin. She is not merely a lady of breeding. She is the noblest, bravest soul I have ever known." He turned back to Clara, ignoring the gasps and the stunned murmurs rippling through the crowd. He looked at her with an adoration so open, so vulnerable, that it felt almost intrusive to witness. "I am not marrying her because of a contract," Arthur declared, his voice breaking with the force of his truth. "I am not marrying her to secure an inheritance. I am marrying her because I was a fool to ever let her go. I am marrying her because I cannot imagine a world without her in it." Tears spilled over Clara's lashes, tracking through the powder on her cheeks. She squeezed his hand so hard her knuckles turned white. Arthur turned back to the vicar. "Proceed." The rest of the ceremony passed in a blur of tearful joy. When Arthur said, "I, Arthur, take thee, Clara," it was a vow forged in fire and blood. When they kissed, it wasn't the polite peck of aristocrats. It was deep and lingering, a seal upon a bond that had survived death, betrayal, and time itself. The applause that followed was thunderous. It started with Beatrice, who sat in the front row, tapping her cane emphatically against the stone floor, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. The rest of the room followed, swept up in the undeniable power of the moment. Even the cynics found themselves wiping their eyes. The reception that followed was legendary. The tension of the past weeks dissolved into a celebration of genuine relief. Wine flowed, music played, lively waltzes and reels that filled the hall with laughter. Arthur and Clara took the floor for the first dance. Because of his shoulder, they could not move fast. They swayed slowly to a hauntingly beautiful melody. Arthur held her close, his good arm wrapped firmly around her waist, while she rested her hand gently on his velvet lapel. "They are all looking at you," Clara whispered, glancing at the periphery where the guests watched in envy. "Let them look," Arthur murmured, brushing his lips against her temple. "I only see you." Hours later, long after the heavy feast had been consumed and the guests had begun to drift away or retire to their chambers, Arthur and Clara escaped. They found sanctuary on the high stone balcony overlooking the estate. The snow had stopped falling. The moon was full, casting a silver light over the endless white fields of Sussex. The air was crisp and cold, but neither of them felt it. "It is finally over," Clara said softly, leaning into his side, careful of his wound. "Frederick is in custody. The debts are cleared. And your grandmother." She paused, shaking her head with a smile. "She looks like the cat who got the cream." Arthur chuckled, the sound low and rich. "She is victorious, though she confessed something to me before the ceremony." Clara looked up at him, her brow furrowing. "Confessed what?" "She told me that she never actually picked you," Arthur said, turning to face his wife. "I don't understand," Clara said. "She sent the carriage. She drew up the contract. She threatened to bankrupt you if you didn't marry me." "True," Arthur smiled, reaching up to tuck a stray lock of dark hair behind her ear. "But she said she didn't pick you because she wanted an heir or because of your pedigree. She said she picked you because she knew you were the only woman I never stopped loving. She knew that if she forced us into a room together, the ice would eventually break." Clara's eyes widened. A soft laugh escaped her lips, a sound of pure disbelief and affection. "So, the Iron Duchess is a romantic, after all?" "A manipulative, ruthless romantic," Arthur corrected, grinning. "But I suppose we owe her a debt of gratitude." "We owe her a great-grandchild eventually," Clara teased, resting her head on his chest. but not tonight. No, Arthur agreed, wrapping his good arm around her and pulling her into the warmth of his body. Tonight, we owe ourselves a honeymoon. Somewhere warm? Italy, perhaps? Anywhere, Clara promised, looking out at the moonlit snow. As long as you are there. Arthur kissed her then, under the light of the Christmas moon. It was a kiss that tasted of winter and wine, of past pain resolved, and future joy promised. The ghosts of William and Hawthorne, the years of silence, the bitterness, it all drifted away like smoke in the wind. The Ice Duke had melted. The Black Widow had come home. And as the clock tower struck midnight, signalling the arrival of Christmas Day, Arthur Sterling held his bride and knew with absolute certainty that the best chapters of their story were yet to be written. And so, the scandal that was meant to tear Ashbury House apart became its greatest strength. Arthur and Clara's story reminds us that sometimes the things we think destroyed us are actually the things that prepared us for our true destiny. Frederick spent the rest of his days in a debtor's prison, while Arthur and Clara lived a long, full life, eventually filling Ashbury Hall with 4 children and enough noise to drive Dowager Beatrice crazy, though rumour has it she loved every minute of it. True love isn't about finding someone perfect. It's about finding the person who fights for you when the world turns cold. What did you think of Arthur and Clara's journey? Did you suspect the grandmother was playing matchmaker all along? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of romance, betrayal, and redemption, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a new story. We have plenty more dramatic tales from history coming your way. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.